Hi, this is Chris Croft with the Ashtanga Workshop podcast. So today we're going to be looking at the shoulder stand sequence at the end of the primary series. So first of all, it's important to say here that the shoulder stand is in fact quite an advanced pose and shouldn't really be attempted by rank beginners unless you're doing it under the supervision of a qualified teacher, which I suggest you do, and he or she may get you to do that against the wall with blocks, rolling up your mat and various other support so that you're doing it safely. To come up into the full shoulder stand, the first thing to do is to bring the feet up over the head. Once the feet are over the head and the hips have come off the floor, your hands are going to come to the small of your back and you're going to begin to walk your elbows towards each other, which will also help to roll the shoulders underneath you and give you added support. So I've come up fairly quickly there, but you can take as much time as you need to bring the feet up. You may wish to keep the knees bent. It's important here that the weight is being distributed across the back of the arms and isn't putting pressure into the back of your neck. So try to keep your chin lifted so that the back of your neck extensors are actually engaged and you're gazing towards your toes. This will also help to draw the lower neck off the floor, and as much as you can, walk your elbows together. If you can get your shoulders to come underneath you, that will give you added support. So you're inverted here, upside down, topsy-turvy. All of the waste products that you've created in the practice are now draining back towards the heart and lungs. Venous blood, lymph, lactic acid. It's worth noting here that ladies, if you're on your cycle, you'd be recommended not to invert. It is sufficient for you to be able to just prop your feet up against the wall, keeping your hips on the floor. And if you've got any upper back or neck problems, you probably won't want to be doing the full version of this pose. So the shoulder stand sequence is really here as a part of the healing at the end of the primary sequence. In many ways it's the most important series of poses, far more important than any of the work we've done with the vinyasas, because this is where the real alchemy of the practice begins. So ideally we begin to hold this pose for between 2 and 5 minutes. That will help the body to really begin to benefit from the inverted nature of the pose. So when you're ready, you're going to begin to come into Halasana. Now Halasana is the plough. It's very important here to try to keep the sit bones lifted when we bring the feet over the head. It's often easier to feel the spine curl in and to collapse. We want to keep the hip flexors switched on, the lower abdominals active, the legs straight and the toes pointed. And if you can, you would bring your hands from the small of your back and interlace them, drawing them away from the back and bracing them against the floor. You may find you can't do that and you may need to keep supporting your lower back. So if your feet don't touch the floor, you may find it nice here to bring a small stool or a seat just behind your head to rest your toes on, and just work on finding that length along the front body. Long deep breaths. So again, maybe here between 1 minute and 2 minutes in this pose before we move into Padmasana. It's often more difficult in this pose to actually keep that chin lifted. One of the reasons we do that is that if the chin collapses down towards that notch just below the neck, then what's happening is a great deal of pressure being put on the vertebrae at the base of the neck, which is something that we're trying to protect. So try to keep the chin lifted so the airway is nice and open, and you're drawing in your core, Uddiyana Bandha, Mula Bandha still engaged. The legs are still active, which is why we point the toes so they don't collapse. And then when you're ready, you can begin to exhale and let your knees come around your ears. So at this point, your spine would curl in. So you can leave the hip flexors, even though they're still switched on, they're not lifting anymore. Let the knees come around the ears and really hug the knees into the ears, bringing the heels together behind the back of your head. Again, your hands are drawing away from your back with your elbows straight, and you're breathing deep. So this is Padmasana, the ear pressure pose. Now as the breath becomes longer and deeper, which it should have been doing over the past few minutes as you've been inverted, at least extending your breath by perhaps 1 or 2 counts. So maybe if your breath was a 3 count throughout the rest of the practice, it's becoming a 4 or 5 count now, lengthening, deepening, is you're finding space in the body mirrored by space in the breath. And you may find it's nice here to close the eyes, otherwise you can look just below the navel, and you should begin to feel the ujjayi breath, almost like waves running up and down a pebbled beach, or maybe like putting your ear to a seashell, which can be very soothing, very relaxing. Again, keeping your toes pointed. The next pose we're going to come into is Urdhva Padmasana, the upward lotus. So in order to do that, we're going to bring the hands back to the small of the back and bring the feet back up into the shoulder stand position. And if you need to here, you would arrange your feet into the lotus using one of your hands, otherwise you can sort of flick them into position. You may find that taking the lotus is too extreme here and you're not ready for that, in which case you would just cross the ankles and do your best here to bring your hands to the front of the knees, straighten the arms and balance. So the balance here really is controlled by the distribution of weight. We often don't realize how far we need to take the knees over the back of your head in order for us to keep the hips up. So the arms should be straight. The balance comes when we find the core stability, the sit bones pushing away again, the chin lifted, and we're balanced on a tripod, and that tripod is the point at the back of your head, your occipital ridge, and both of the shoulders. And it takes a few weeks, maybe quite a while, in order for us to get that balance, but after a while the pose begins to become quite relaxing and, dare I say it, almost enjoyable. So again, you're looking here for long deep breaths, between 10 and 15 long ujjayi breaths before we come into Pindasana, as we drop the feet down, letting the knees come down around the ears. Again, the spine curls here just as it did in the Padmasana pose, and now the hands come all the way around the front of the knees, which are in the full lotus, and we take the bind if we can, and we should just be able to see a little bit past the shins as we breathe deeply. So again, if you're not able to take the full lotus here, what you would do is you would keep the ankles crossed and bring the arms around, and taking the opposite foot with the opposite hand, you would begin to draw the feet deeper. So as you draw the hands away, the feet come into a deeper cross. And again, after a while, the heels begin to pressure into the crease of the hip, which helps with lymph drainage, but also you're working here to find softness, really trying to find a stillness within the pose. So turning the palms over, using your forearms as brakes, you're rolling out slowly one vertebrae at a time, keeping the feet in the full lotus if you can, otherwise they're still crossed. Using the elbows to arch the spine, coming onto the crown of your head, and coming into Matsyasana, the fish. The hands then come over the top of the thighs. If they can, they take the feet, otherwise they just take the inner thighs and help on the opening of the hips. Elbows are grounded, and you're looking over the top of your head, and there's huge expansion here in the rib cage. One of the reasons why it's called the fish. You're feeling like a fish out of water. The breath is still long and deep. The lung fibers are being stretched, oxygenated blood flowing through that internal viscera. And again, 10 to 15 breaths here. That might be between 1 and 2 minutes before you uncross the lotus. Try to keep the head in the same position and the spine arched, and coming into Uttana Padasana. So this is a challenging pose, difficult pose, really works with the lower abdominals and the hip flexors. Try to keep the feet pointed at the same level as your hands, and again look behind you. It's often more difficult to be able to keep that breath flowing full and deep in this pose because it is more demanding. And if you can, you would hold it for the same length, 10 to 15 long breaths. To come out, we're going to Chakrasana. So the hands are going to come down behind the head, the feet are going to flick over, so it's like a backward roll. As you flick out, walk the hands forwards, coming into an up dog, back into a down dog, and then preparing for the end of the finishing sequence.